Welcome to episode 310 of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about BioWare's plans for Mass Effect and Dragon Age, Death Stranding shadow dropping on Xbox, how US tariffs could impact gamers, and much more. Before we get started, subscribe to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, or subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. Gaming news, let's jump right into it. Let's kick it off with Xbox. We woke up yesterday and Death Stranding was on Xbox. This is kind of an interesting story. So apparently, it seems that there was a 5-year exclusivity deal and like co-ownership deal, I assume, of the IP of Death Stranding by PlayStation. But now Kojima owns the IP outright and was able to publish it on other platforms, namely Xbox, using 505 as a publisher, which is kind of interesting. I mean, there isn't really anything that notable about this. It is coming out at 50% off, which is kind of cool. It's also Play Anywhere, so if you buy it on your Xbox, you can also play it on your PC. I don't know if it's cross-save. I would imagine it is, as many of those titles are. The honest truth is I have zero interest in this game. I bought it. I'm curious to check it out, and for $20, why not have it? It seems like it's a very subjective game for people. That some people seem to really get into it and enjoy what it does, and then a lot of people just thought it was a walking simulator with pretty cutscenes. So we'll see about that. I'll definitely check it out myself for at least a little bit. It's interesting because the timing on this is obviously fortunate. We have Death Stranding 2, I believe, coming out in 2025 and next year. And I don't know if this is a play to try to entice people to go over and grab a PlayStation so they can do that, or wait a little bit for a PC version, or wait a long bit for the Xbox version of the second game. It does make me wonder if it's kind of surprising that they even did a 5-year deal. Kojima, for better or worse, whether you like him or not, has a lot of clout, has a lot of, I imagine, sway in this industry. And the fact that he was willing to sign a 5-year exclusivity deal is interesting. It makes me suspect that Sony probably basically fully paid for the development of this game, I have to imagine. So yeah, it's curious. It's funny how, and obviously it's coming from different strategies and for different reasons, but that we definitely didn't get the same reaction to this as we've seen when some Xbox games have gone to PlayStation. Again, I'm doing the Xbot thing. I get it. I know it's, he's obviously not part of a first party studio, even though a lot of people at least at one point, felt like it was kind of one of those like second party studio situations, even though now we know that Kojima Productions is working on a Xbox exclusive game as well. Not to mention they're also doing a PlayStation exclusive in Death Stranding 2. There are not too many game developers / studios who would be able to pull that off. So yeah, if you were waiting to play Death Stranding, or you never considered it because you don't have a PlayStation, or I believe there's a PC version, you can do it now, and it's only $20. So have fun. We got a social media post from the Gears of War Twitter account showing the original voice actors for Marcus and Dom are at the voice recording studio, and they are reprising their roles for E-Day. If you don't remember from this summer, Xbox had a really, really, really good showcase, and that included showing that they were doing a prequel to Gears of War 1, for the next Gears game. And I mean, at least like the engine cinematic they showed looked really cool. I personally do think the idea of seeing the emergence of the locusts and kind of to get like the actual beginning of that story, which we've only heard about through all the games. It sounds really cool to me. I'm really excited. And the Coalition are just like Unreal Engine masters. So seeing what they're going to do with Unreal Engine 5, maybe it'll be the first Unreal Engine 5 game that will actually run well on consoles. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, super excited. That's really, really cool. I'm not the biggest Gears fan, but there is something about, the prequel idea of that is really enticing to me. We also have Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. A gameplay deep dive is going to release on 11/11 of 2024. That date format works no matter where you're from. Whether it's the United States, month, and then day, or if you're wrong like everyone else. American exceptionalism, except not at all. We'll get into that later. I'm still so torn about Indiana Jones. I read and saw some of the previews, and it seems like some people either love it or don't. It's very interesting. I still just wish it was a third-person game. I don't. It's Machine Games, and they know how to make really good games. That's even though secretly I actually don't really like the Wolfenstein games that much. I just have never gotten into them. But they're heralded. Everyone, they're critically loved. They're, I think, not even just critical. I think even fans seem to have a pretty consistent love for them. So I have no doubt that this Indiana Jones game, it was really interesting. One podcast was the Kind of Funny preview, and there were, I think, 3 people who previewed and talked about it. One being fairly high on it, and the other 2 seeming pretty low on it. And then when they asked, like, what's your prediction on what you would give it out of like a 10 out of 10 score, right? And the couple of them who were really down on it were like, probably like a 7.5 to an 8, which is like a really good score. Like that's, if you give a game a 7 or an 8 out of 10, you like that game. You may be able to come up with a lot of flaws and things that held it back for you. But if you give a game a 7 or 8 out of 10, you like that game. You enjoyed it a lot. But then when you heard the way they talked about the game, you wouldn't have guessed that. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I'm still just waiting for something about that game to sell it on me. I don't know. I'm not excited for it. I'm definitely going to play it. No doubt, but I don't know. Strange stuff. We'll have to wait and see what comes of that. Moving over to PlayStation news, we have the PS5 Pro has arrived in customer hands. We've been getting reviews and stuff like that about it. It's really interesting. So the general note is it is what they said it was going to be. It's a light boost. Most games are running a little bit better. Games that maybe really have never really ran well are doing a little bit better. I can't remember if it was Elden Ring or another game that it's the video I saw was like better, but still not great. And so I think it's interesting because this PS5 Pro, I've been saying it for a while, this is basically a beta test for this PSSR system. They gave it a little more horsepower in the GPU. I think the CPU is the same. I think it's newer RAM. I think it's like a higher grade of RAM. It's a little bit more memory in it. But for the most part, it seems like this is like a beta test for the PS6. It's a way for them to put out some new hardware, pull in a little bit more revenue. This isn't going to sell that much on it, more than likely. And that's been kind of reflected in the reviews. Most of the reviews have been positive, but like, it seems like you basically have to be like a Digital Foundry type person to like actually see a difference. Because the whole thing, and I found the marketing of the PS5 Pro interesting because so much of the marketing is focused on look at the way the quality mode looks on the PS5 compared to the 60 FPS, quality mode essentially on the PS5 Pro. Look how much better it looks. But then you see a lot of people being like, well, there is 60 FPS on the PS5. It's just a lower visual quality. And then when you compare the actual, gameplay experience of the PS5 Pro and the PS5 on like a, say, performance mode, it's really not that much different. It is different. It's presenting it at a higher resolution, crisper graphics, all that for sure. But is it worth it? Is the extra money even worth it though? Like, is it so much better it's worth upgrading your existing PS5 or and I feel like that's been the question I've seen so many of the reviews and so much of the commentary on this thing kind of wrestle with. It kind of seems like to me that it's, if you didn't get a PS5 yet, it's probably the one to buy. It's going to have the longest legs. It's going to have, be playing games at a higher quality level for longer, than the PS5, obviously. But it really doesn't seem like it's worth upgrading though. Like, at least not to me. So yeah, we'll have to see how that goes. There was an interesting article that I think it was VGC or Eurogamer or someone was like, scalpers who pre-ordered the PS5 Pro are selling consoles at a loss because they're not sold out. And it was so funny how like the tone of that article was so much different than it would have been with maybe other platforms, because it means that it's more than likely the PS5 Pro isn't, like, it's not sold out. You can just go buy one. Because it's probably not going to sell that well. It's, I think everyone, and even myself to a point, was expecting, the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X sold pretty well. All things considered, I believe the PS4 sold around like 120 million units, and I think like 15 to 20 million of those were pros. That's a lot. That's a big chunk of their revenue. That's a big chunk of their sales. I would be really, really surprised if they sell more than, maybe 4 or 5 million units of this, which is still a lot. They'll make a lot of money off of it, and they're going to keep selling PS5s for sure. The difference is that the PS4 and the Xbox One were kind of bad hardware the day they released. They were using, they weren't mobile chipsets. They were like laptop quality CPUs and GPUs instead of like desktop quality, the way the current systems have. And they just weren't very good. They were kind of underpowered from day one. And so the One X and the PS4 Pro didn't really completely alleviate that, but they were significantly better. And it's kind of what we're seeing with the PS5 Pro is on the PS4 Pro and the One X. There were games that like for me, it was like The Division that played at 30 FPS, like an okay quality level. Then the One X came out. I got 60 FPS and it looked really good. I don't know what the resolution was or whatever. I don't care. Again, I'm not Digital Foundry, so I'm really curious to how the PS5 Pro plays out in the long run. It was good. They have 50 plus games that were optimized for it on day one. Plus, it has like a game boost feature that is very reminiscent of another platform, something they had 4 years ago. That kind of takes games and makes them look a little better without any input from the original developer. So that stuff's really cool. I haven't seen anyone be like, this is, I regret getting this PS5 Pro. I'm sure people who have it will be fine with it. But I really don't think that there's been any argument really made for like getting it, especially if you already have a PlayStation 5. I'm curious to what this means in the long run. I think the timing of this means that we're probably 3 or 4 years away from a PS6, and that's going to be extremely interesting if Xbox really does what a lot of predictions have been. They release their new system as early as in about a year and a half or 2 years. I would be very curious to what the market would look like if these consoles were separated by 2 or 3 years between them, and when they release, and how there almost could be kind of a handoff every 2 or 3 years between the consoles instead of always releasing at the same time. And I kind of wonder if that would almost be a better thing, but we'll have to wait and see. Sony investor call had some interesting thoughts on new IP. Basically, they don't want to make new IP because it's really expensive and it's really, really risky. And instead, and that includes things like Concord and the live service games that they've kind of attempted and failed to make work. Besides Helldivers 2, which has had its own issues and isn't a first party game, even though it is owned by them, it's it's kind of like a Death Stranding situation. It suggests that PlayStation's gonna probably make a bunch more remakes and remasters. They did specify that they do want at least one big major game release every fiscal year. That would be the Last of Us and the Spider-Man and the Wolverine and the Uncharted's and like those type of games. That's not very many, if I have to be honest. It makes sense because games take a long time. Sony they don't have as many studios as you think they do. At least not in comparison to something like Xbox at this point. I'm curious to what this will mean for the long run. I've been saying for a while that I think a lot of the moves you see Xbox make, I don't think it's because Xbox is dumb. I think Xbox is doing things because I think they're trying to be a little more future thinking and they're trying to set themselves up for success in the future. So when they've done these multi-platform initiatives, when they've, not just made, single player over the shoulder sad dad games exclusively, I feel like they've done those things because they don't think that's sustainable long run, even if the short term success isn't as good as it could be if they emulated Sony's kind of formula more. It was interesting because I saw some other podcasts and commentators kind of painting this as like Sony learns their lesson from Concord. And it's like, I guess what I really think they did is they just didn't do a thing very well that if they did it well would have been really good for them. And so instead of trying to innovate or push the boundaries at all, they're just going to go back to old reliables. And that will probably work for them. When they put out Last of Us 3, when they put out the new Wolverine game, when they put out the Ghost of Yotai and stuff like that, they're going to be rewarded by good reviews, lots of sales, more hardware moved. Like, that's fine. I just I've questioned for a long time how sustainable their kind of thing is, which seems like a stupid thing to say because they're just kicking the crap out of Xbox so bad right now, at least in certain metrics. But then that takes away the conversation of, is Xbox really trying to compete in those metrics? Is, PlayStation, hitting the metrics that everyone pays attention to? When are we going to have a conversation whether or not those metrics are really matter that much anymore for anything other than bragging? So we'll have to wait and see. The PS5 Pro launch seems like it's been overall pretty good, but kind of unremarkable in the big picture because it's really not that big of a jump, at least from what we can tell so far. Astrobot has sold 1.5 million copies. Good for them. That's cool. A lot of people saying that was their game of the year when it came out. I've seen those calls kind of drying up a little bit, but I'm sure it'll still get nominated by a lot of people, by a lot of the outlets. 1.5 actually seems kind of low to me, but probably not for what it is. It really, these sales numbers become such a playground for people with like kind of bad faith and stuff like that. What really matters is what the expectation was, and we don't know that. What Sony want. Obviously, Sony would love to sell 50 million copies of Astrobot, but what is the actual number they're looking at to get enough return on investment from this game to justify making more of them or making similar games or games in a similar situation? So, if their expectation was to sell, 2 million copies to be profitable to a point that they're comfortable, and it's already at 1.5, they're probably going to do that. If they were hoping to sell 10 million copies, that may be a little less likely. So we'll have to wait and see. Going over to Nintendo, they have officially confirmed that the next hardware release, which we're expecting in 2025, will be backwards compatible with the Switch. It was funny when this got announced because there's a few people I follow who were like, well, of course this was going to happen. And I just wanted to be like, bro, it's Nintendo. Like, you can't ever predict what Nintendo is going to do the generation after they have a huge success. Like you just never know. They could do anything. They could be wild, you know. They went from the 64, which was very successful, and then they had, something like the GameCube, which was a cool system, but had so many bad decisions in it that kind of held it back. Then they had the Wii, which is like one of the biggest things that's ever happened in gaming. And then they had the Wii U, which was not very good, like hilariously bad. Then they had the Switch, which has been like another kind of a Wii almost situation where everyone has one. In my family, in my extended family, there are like very few gamers, but almost everyone, every family in my extended family has a Switch. I don't know if any of them have played it in years at this point, but they have them. And they got that sale at some point from them. So cool. Awesome. I'm glad they're doing backwards compatible games. Maybe all of the games they've made for the last 8 years will actually run well on the new system. Whatever, different strokes. And Nintendo is still pursuing legal action against Palworld, including injunctions and lawsuits. So we will see how that plays out in the long run. Let's talk about the other news. We have a bunch of BioWare stuff. This is my my little personal segment here. We'll talk about Dragon Age, Mass Effect, and just kind of BioWare in general. So Dragon Age, the Veilguard, was announced that it will not have DLC and that they are going all in on Mass Effect development moving forward. Seems fine. There was conversation leading up to the release. I believe some of the developers were getting interviewed and were like, DLC is a thing we have to figure out later, but that they feel like Veilguard is a full experience that doesn't need DLC. In some of the interviews, you will see that they felt like with Dragon Age Inquisition, there was the Trespasser DLC, which was basically essential and from what I have gathered, is a huge part of the Veilguard story, and one of the main characters in it. And they didn't want to do that again. They didn't want to make crucial story beats a DLC. And as they got to release, I think it seems like they feel like they have a full experience. And I'll be honest, from all the reviews and all the commentary I've seen around the game, I've seen no one really complain about a lack of end game or DLC and stuff like that. There's definitely people who enjoyed the game and wish there was more of it, but that's just kind of like a more general desire for more time in this universe. That this seems like a good thing, and I suspect there's some financials behind this as well. This game was in development for a long time. Supposedly it was rebooted multiple times into kind of different genres and styles of game. And it probably cost them a ton of money to make this. And there may be kind of a hesitancy to even risk putting more money into it. I've been saying for a while that I suspect the goal with Veilguard is to break even. Between marketing costs, development costs, all of that, they're probably just hoping to break even. And if they sell enough, that's probably the most important thing. If they make money off of it, fantastic. I'm sure everyone's going to be happy about that. But more than anything, it seems like they were really focused on just getting this game out as quick as possible, but in good shape, which, at least in my experience, they definitely have. It's also notable, and this isn't that surprising, because at least with some other games I've been involved with or knew people who worked on, when they released the game, they were normally months into pre-production or even full production of DLC. Because, if a DLC comes out 6 months, 12 months later after the game does, they didn't just start working on that when the game released. They were working on that before it released. And if for the freaks like me who pay attention, especially to BioWare, and I have a few other studios I keep a close eye on, if you follow the developers of Veilguard and developers at BioWare in general, for the last 3 or 4 months, they've all been taking vacations. Even some of the directors of the game were taking vacation before Veilguard even came out. If that's not confidence in a product, I don't know what is, because I've heard stories of other game devs, especially director level folks, who didn't even go home for the last month before the game came out, let alone take a multi-week vacation. So we also see that there's been multiple devs who are working over at EA Motive, which is, I think, a former BioWare studio, on their Iron Man game, doing some production work for them, to the point where I actually spoke to a couple people, and the general consensus was like, yeah, we're gonna do this until pre-production is done on Mass Effect, then we'll go back over to BioWare and we'll go hard on the next Mass Effect. There was another comment that was interesting, and during an interview where there's with the release of Veilguard, there's been asking about like remaking or remastering Origins or Dragon Age 2. Inquisition, probably could use a remaster at this point, but it's a little bit newer game. And with Origins and 2, the problem is that the engine it used is proprietary, and that they believe there may only be 20 or so people left at BioWare who even know how the engine works. And that doesn't mean they still know how it works. It means they probably did at one point. The thing I've been telling people for a long time when I've seen this come up, the Mass Effect Legendary Edition was a easy, quote unquote, remaster, because they basically just used a bunch of AI tools and I think some fairly simple Unreal Engine tools to just lift up the old games to look a little better, to run at higher resolutions, have a little bit crisper textures, things like that. They probably redid some stuff from scratch, but not very much. The Legendary Edition of Mass Effect was probably a fairly, again, quote unquote, easy project for them, where if they try to release Origins and Dragon Age 2, they can't really remaster it. That engine hasn't been worked on probably in 15-20 years. So there's no like new version of that engine to implement the games on and try to uplift them the way Mass Effect could. So instead, they would be remakes. They would have to remake Origins and Dragon Age 2. And when you get into remakes, especially of giant Western RPGs, you're talking about like, it's basically making a new game. Like you're not just, throwing a small team on this and they knock it out in a year. This is, you put a full development team from your studio on it, and it takes 2 or 3 years to make and to go in, not to mention all the pre-production you would have to do before that. Because again, while you would have like a template to run off of, you would probably be making all new assets, all new voice acting, all new almost everything. So yeah, I wouldn't expect to see remasters for sure of Origins or 2 for Dragon Age. Maybe a remake one day. Finally, my kind of ongoing thoughts about the Veilguard. I am around, I think, between 35 and 40 hours at this point. I believe I'm like a mission or two away from the no turning back point of the story, where then there's another handful of missions after that to finish the game. I'm trying not to rush right into that, because something I learned from my Mass Effect Legendary Edition playthroughs is I really wish I would have let my first playthrough be completely unguided. The first time I played Mass Effect, I mostly played it unguided, but I did use a guide for the suicide mission, which I regret so much, because now I know how it works and there's like no mystery to it. And so with this game, I've been trying to slow myself down and not just jump headstrong into the story, but do everyone's companion quest lines, do some side mission stuff to get my rep up with the various factions around Thetis. And I've been like forcing myself to stay. I'm so curious how it ends. I've stayed unspoiled. I'm so happy at this point still that I don't know what happens. It's all a mystery to me, and I'm trying to keep it that way. And I'm glad I'm doing it the way I am. So I plan on doing a full review once I finish the game. I will almost certainly do a second playthrough eventually. It's a long, meaty game, and I think a second playthrough will feel faster because I'll kind of know what's coming. But yeah, I like it. I like it so much. The first few hours I think are fine, but we're kind of not, they're very handholdy. Now that like once you get like completely let go to do whatever you want, it just improves so much. I like the characters a lot. There's been all this talk about, there's a few various moments and missions and conversations that happen where it feels like people feel like there's like politics and stuff getting pushed. There's definitely some of that stuff, and some of it's kind of awkward, and I don't think executed extremely well. But I don't care. I think the message is good, even if it's not provided very well. It's maybe a little too on the nose at a few points, but It's not hurting anybody, and there's going to be people who see or hear this stuff, and it's going to mean a lot to them. Doesn't hurt me, helps someone else. In my book, that's an okay thing. So all the losers who I've been hiding from my channel for the last 2 weeks because they just can't, they just, man, they've watched too many of those content creators, or, you know, spent too much time on Twitter, and they're so obsessed with this crap where there's just no reason to be. It's strange. I like the characters. I like the story. I love the gameplay. The gameplay is really, really fun. The environments are beautiful. My only real complaints are like kind of nitpicky stuff. Like at the main base, I hate that it's just so formulaic to interact with everyone else. It's you go to the lighthouse, which is the main base, and either people are in their rooms and they're ready to talk and they have a little icon indicating that, or they two of them are standing somewhere in the area chatting about something, and if you walk up to them and wait a few seconds, you'll hear what they're talking about. But like, at least as far as I've seen, there's no one just walking around. There's no one like milling about their room. There's no one milling about the kitchen. It's so unnatural, and it's so like inorganic feeling. And I don't like that. The cities have kind of a similar thing too, where there's just a bunch of people standing in one place when you walk around. If there are people walking around, I haven't really noticed, but I have noticed the people who are just these stagnant, you know, they have their little animation they're doing or whatever. But it does make the cities feel pretty artificial. I'm kind of okay with that though, and maybe it's just copium, because a lot of the game feels like that. Like the game doesn't feel like you're in like real cities and stuff, and that's okay. It's a game, and whether it was on purpose or not, they've really like gone all in on that. Like there's these pots that give you either it helps charge up your ultimate ability, or it gives you health, or gives you health potions that you can save, and they're just everywhere. Like there was no effort. Like in some areas they're kind of like in with other pots or boxes or whatever, but in a lot, especially like boss arenas and stuff, they're just there. They're just out there in the middle. Like, hey, if you need health, here you go. They're big and they're green and they're hard to miss. And there's a part of me that, because the game is kind of stylized, because it's not trying to be like ultra realistic looking and ultra perfect, you know, I kind of love it. It's just a game. It's a very gamified. And at first it threw me off a little bit, but as I've done it, I know I'm playing a game, and they're not trying to hide that. And so I actually kind of like it. I've come to kind of enjoy that. So overall, I'm still liking Veilguard a lot. I'm excited to do like a final review once I finish it, which hopefully will be by hopefully next week. Moving over to another BioWare thing, we have Mass Effect 2024 in 7-day. They made sure everyone knew leading up to this, like, hey, it's going to be a quieter year. This may not be the biggest reveal we've ever had. And man, they were right. In lieu of even doing a blog, they eventually posted it as a blog, but on social media, they basically posted a couple paragraphs, and that was it, directly from BioWare. Now, they did a bunch of other stuff did come out. So we found out that the Amazon TV series is like in development right now. They posted a bunch of new merchandise, including, for me, a newer fan. They have Dark Horse has a Shepherd figure that is super cool and is going to take a year to get here. They added some N7 cosmetics to the Veilguard, and they have some flavor text, which is really interesting. I'll cover that more in some videos and my Mass Effect podcast. It's called Mass Effect Hypecast, so go check that out. No Man's Sky and Destiny 2 are redoing some collaborations they've done with Mass Effect in the past. And yeah, and so, you know, but they said like, hey, this is going to be a quiet year for us. I suspect they had plenty to show. If they did last year, they surely could have this year. My guess is that either internally or externally, there was pressure for them not to have like a big thing to take away attention from the Veilguard. I am curious if that was the right strategy. My opinion, a idiot who I am, would think that you would want to like piggyback or do like the rising tide raises all ships thing by bringing more attention to the Veilguard by making exciting announcements about Mass Effect. And then people are like, oh yeah, BioWare, I love Mass Effect. What have they been up to? Oh, they just released a game. Oh, Dragon Age, yeah, I played those back then. Oh, that's my scenario that I think they should have maybe tried to go after, but they didn't. So yeah, we didn't get much. I think that from a speculation perspective, there is some stuff to dig into, especially some of the flavor text and the items that were given to players in Veilguard. There's a video coming for that. I promise. We'll be talking about that and how I think that they keep messaging something to us about the next Mass Effect that seems less and less likely, but they keep messaging it. So we'll get there. But overall for BioWare, I think they're in an interesting spot. Knowing that they've straight up said we're focused on Mass Effect from here on out. I'm anticipating that they're going to announce full production on that, probably on their 25th anniversary in May. And that game will be out in 2 or 3 years after that, hopefully. Hopefully it's not too far away, and hopefully I don't have to say that Jeff Grubb was right about his 2029 or 2030 prediction, even though he's starting to he might have been. I may have gotten a little too high on my own supply there, but we'll have to wait and see. I think the other part of this is that, with the N7 day, my guess is we don't have to wait until N7 day 2025 to get interesting information about the next Mass Effect. I bet they announce, my guess is they'll do a general studio update blog or something in January or February to say after the release of Veilguard, here's all the stats we're willing to talk about, how many sales, how many players, whatever. And we're hard at work on Mass Effect. We have more on that soon. And then I bet in May they'll do hey, we're doing full production on Mass Effect. Let's go. And then I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the summer or early fall, they have some kind of, hey, here's what's going on with Mass Effect. And then, months later we'll have N7 day. And I assume that will be the pattern we're in for a couple years until the game comes out. So BioWare's back. I'm saying it. I believe it. Even if there's a bunch of weird losers on the internet who are obsessed with things that don't matter to them, or shouldn't, at least. Yoshi P of Square Enix says that they plan on releasing their future games day and date on Xbox and PlayStation. As Square Enix has been pretty vocal about not doing the exclusivity stuff anymore. There's a rift has happened between them and PlayStation in some capacity. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out in the long run. Ubisoft Massive announced that Drew Reckner has taken over as creative director on Star Wars Outlaws, while Julian Garrity, the previous creative director, is taking his role, that same role, with The Division 3, which is in, I believe, pre-production right now. I don't think that they're in full production on that yet, but I could be wrong. I bet they announce that in the next year or so. This is cool. Drew Reckner worked on the original Division 1 and 2. He for Division 1, for any people who care, was one of the main people who designed the AI behind Hunters, the Hunter enemies, which I think is super cool. It's kind of like a legendary it's just a really cool part of Division 1. I think they've kind of ruined them in Division 2, but that's a different video. But yeah, super cool. I'm excited for Drew. He's I interacted with him a couple times at E3 when I went there. He's a really, really, really nice guy. And I'm excited to see Julian moving on to the next thing. He's, I believe, also the IP director for the Division itself. So he's obviously going to be the creative director for the Division 3. But he kind of is managing that whole brand in general now. I'm excited for Division 3. I've definitely fallen out of love with 2. I love 2. 2's my favorite Division game. I love the first one, but 2 is still, I think, the better one. But basically everything they've done since launch, I'm very mid on. The Warlords of New York DLC was cool, but it definitely felt like Division 1 DLC. Its timeline makes no sense. And then all the stuff they've done since then with the story, especially, the gameplay's just been kind of samey. But the story, what they've done, it's it's gone way too far into like the sci-fi part of things, I think. And I kind of genuinely hope they like retcon everything that's happened since release, but we'll have to wait and see. I do want it in Chicago in winter, though. That's the only option I will accept. Hardware costs are expected to jump by up to 40% if the new United States president, Donald J. Trump, implements the tariff plan he's been touting for months at this point. The kind of the real world example here is that the $700 PlayStation 5 Pro would likely be around, if not above, $1,000. Look, I try to stay away from politics in this show. With all the DEI and anti-woke crap that's been going on, I've delved a little bit into it. I've tried to stay mostly away from it, though. This thing here, I mean, I have some thoughts, but that would be for a whole different podcast about the election. But this stuff, like this is the people who voted for him voted for this. He has not been shy about wanting to do this, thinking, I don't know. I mean, I do know what the idea behind it is, but it's not going to work because manufacturing in the United States doesn't make PlayStations or things that are only made other places, and it would take us decades to do that again. So this is the reality. This is what's going to happen if those plans go through. Now, whether or not that person implements plans that they say they were going to do during their election campaign, that proved not to be very true during the last term. But if they do it, it's going to affect us. I think that there's a propensity in some communities, especially gaming, to kind of try to pretend like, this is our escape and those things don't impact us. And they do, and they're going to, more than likely. So I don't know, something to keep an eye on. Maybe if you want PS5 Pro, you get it before February is my suggestion. Then the last story here, Pokemon, the card game Pocket, a new mobile game, has gotten over 30 million downloads and has already made $12 million in revenue. And a little bit of that is from this guy right here. This legit might end up being my game of the year. I don't want to say it. I don't want to admit that. Right now it's probably still Hellblade. I want to see how Veilguard wraps up and see if it jumps Hellblade or not. But there is a solid chance that Pokemon, the card game Pocket, ends up in my top 5, almost for sure. And it could break that top 3, man. I don't know. I'll have to do a retrospective and look back at the other games I played this year before I decide that. But it's cool. And you really can play a lot of it without spending a single penny. I've done it because gaming is what I spend my money on. Gaming is my hobby. And so, I don't mind spending a few bucks on things like this every now and then. But it's a lot of fun. It's very addicting. It could definitely be a lot better. They definitely need to streamline it a bit, but it's a cool game. It's the card game on phone. It's not like Pokemon Go or like the video games on like Game Boy and Switch and stuff. It's the card game, but on a phone. But it's simplified in a way that like I never knew how to play the card game, but now I do. At least the version that's on this app. So if you're into Pokemon, I think it's worth at least taking a peek at. Going over to some content updates for myself. I'm going to keep on streaming, making videos, and doing podcasts. We don't really have anything in the super near future that I'm really looking forward to with like showcases and stuff like that. We will have the Game Awards here in a few weeks, in about a month, which will be interesting. Yeah. The thing for me is that my main game of the year right now, Hellblade 2, has no chance to win the big awards. So this year's kind of nice because I can just kind of watch, because whatever wins is not going to be mine, unless the Veilguard gets some attention. I think the Veilguard will get some nominations. I'd be surprised if it won, but just nominations would be, I think, a success. And then we'll probably have we'll have the Nintendo announcement of their next hardware in early 25. We'll likely have a Xbox showcase in early 25, because they do kind of like every 6 months they do the summer showcase, but they always tend to do some kind of showcase in between the big summer ones. Unfortunately, this year in 2024, it was probably that podcast they did explaining the multi-platform stuff, but hopefully we can get through the year without more of that crap. I will be recording a Mass Effect Hypecast for the N7 day. But since N7 day was kind of sparse, I'm actually probably going to wait until I finish the Veilguard and then record the Hypecast about N7 day and the Veilguard and how I kind of feel about the next Mass Effect and BioWare after playing Veilguard. The stream or the podcast I was going to do with N7 Legend, I'll have to see how he feels. I don't know if he's going to want to do a whole show just to talk about the little that we got, but I don't know if he's playing Veilguard or not. If he is, maybe we can do a show together talking about that similar thing. So that's the plan for the future, and that is where I am going to start to wrap things up right here. If you have your own topics, questions, or feedback, be sure to let me know in my Discord, in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on social media at Bondiesel or at the Baunfire. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.